All right, hey guys, today we are going to be talking about journalism ethics. So, you might remember that last time we talked about anything that dealt with journalism ethics, we talked about copyright and fair use. Today we're going to be talking about the First Amendment and your rights as a student journalist. So, let's get into it. So, you guys are publishing a magazine this semester, and you're so close to being done, which is awesome. You are taking your feature stories that are all about these people, their businesses, their lives, what they're doing, and you're writing about them, and then you're designing things about them too, and you're putting them in this magazine that you want to share with the world, right? Well, just like anyone who's a journalist who publishes any publication, yearbook, magazines, newspapers, zines, any establishment must respect the rights of those whose lives and experiences are displayed on their pages. So, your magazine, whether you knew it or not, is actually subject to applicable laws and standards that all professionals must follow. That being said, 18 or not, you are legally responsible for whatever you print. So that basically says is that this First Amendment is that Congress shall make no law respecting or an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or of the right of people to peacefully assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. So basically, what this First Amendment does is that it's going to protect you to an extent. It says in here that we have a freedom of speech or of the press. This allows journalists, this allows the press, this allows the media to basically be able to have the freedom to write about things that are happening in the world. Now, as a journalist, we've obviously have standards that we hold ourselves to. Now, I wouldn't say every single journalist or every single media that I have consumed is essentially ethical, right? Sometimes I question the decisions that the media has made, and we are allowed to do that. We do that through certain ways. We can, bring things like slander to the court. But at the same time, us as journalists, we are allowed certain freedoms that the First Amendment gives us so that we can actually speak truth about what is happening in the world around us. And as a student, you have all the rights that are within this First Amendment. Unfortunately, though, throughout the past, I would say 100 so years or more, we've really gotten a better sense of what students are allowed to say and what they're not allowed to say, because you are not a professional yet. You are not 18 yet. There are establishments that help to protect you, like the New Voices of Texas. You can take a look at that. You can research it, New Voices of Texas. That are here to help protect you and things that you want to say. But at the same time, there is censorship. So what exactly does censorship mean as a student journalist? Basically, school officials have the liberty to censor information as we see fit. We're not just going to tell you, you can't write that, you can't write that. That's not okay. The First Amendment gives you the right to say, no, you can write that. You have the freedom to. But as a student journalist, we actually do have, you do have some censorship. Now, myself, Ms. Krasinski, she's the principal here, and AISD in general, have the authority to control speech and expression at the school. Now, how much we use it is really dependent on how we see, how fitting it's going to be. So really, even though, yes, you do receive First Amendment rights, you receive less First Amendment protection at school grounds. We're going to look at some Supreme Court cases that actually deal with students who want more freedom at school, but school officials have said, no, you can't say this, you can't do certain things, and have tried to limit students' First Amendment rights. Now, I'm not saying all students win these cases, depending on where politics are in different generations. The 1960s and 70s were very different than the 1980s and 1990s. We see a change in politics. We see a change in culture. And so what we're going to see is in these Supreme Court cases is that Supreme Court might side with students on some things, but they might side with school officials to say, no, schools are allowed to censor certain things. So that's kind of an interesting thing. So the first case we're actually going to look at with this is called Tinker versus Des Moines. This was back in the 1960s, and we're going to watch this little video, and it's going to give you a better idea about what free speech in school is and what happened back with this case.
Mr. Beat presents Supreme Court Briefs. Des Moines, Iowa, December 16th, 1965. 15-year-old John Tinker, his 13-year-old sister Mary Beth Tinker, his 11-year-old sister Hope Tinker, and his 8-year-old brother Paul Tinker, along with his friend 16-year-old Christopher Eckhart, wear black armbands to school as a way to protest the ongoing Vietnam War. The principals of the schools all told their students they couldn't wear these armbands or they would be punished. Well, they wore them anyway. So the principals suspended John, Mary Beth, and Christopher, saying they couldn't come back to school unless they came not wearing the armbands. The students would not return to school until January, but in protest wore black clothing every day for the rest of the school year. Meanwhile, after the suspension of the students made the front page of the local paper, the Des Moines Register, the Iowa Civil Liberties Union approached the Tinkers and said, "Hey, the school district can't do that. You should sue them. We will help you." Actually, the ACLU, or American Civil Liberties Union, stepped in to help the Tinker family and Eckhart sue the Des Moines Independent Community School District, arguing that the First Amendment protected the students' right to protest at school. Obviously, the kids couldn't sue, so their dads were the ones who filed suit. The U.S. District Court for the Southern District of Iowa upheld the prohibition of armbands. While it acknowledged the students had the right to protest under the First Amendment, their concern was that a school would have a hard time keeping an orderly environment where students could learn stuff if protests like this were going on. The Tinkers and Eckharts appealed to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Eighth Circuit, but that court was evenly divided, so they appealed directly to the Supreme Court, who heard arguments on November 12, 1968. So West Virginia State Board of Education v. Barnett had already said students had constitutional protections at school, but this case dealt specifically with free speech rights. Dan Johnston, the lawyer for the students, said the district had previously let other kinds of political speech occur and that it didn't disrupt learning at school. Alan Herrick, the lawyer for the district, said the district should be allowed to limit speech if it seems like it could lead to, quote, violence, disorder, and disruption. That didn't convince the court, though. On February 24th, 1969, it announced it had sided with Tinker and Company. It was 7-2. The court argued the armbands symbolized pure speech that was completely separate from any actions of those wearing them. The court also argued that just because they were students on school property didn't mean they lost their First Amendment right of freedom of speech. Justice Abe Fortas wrote, quote, "It can hardly be argued that either students or teachers shed their constitutional rights to freedom of speech or expression at the schoolhouse gate," unquote. Justice Hugo Black wrote a dissent saying that the armbands did, in fact, disrupt school activities. And later Supreme Court cases like Bethel School District v. Frazier and Morse v. Frederick would seem to favor his perspective with this case. Regardless, Tinker v. Des Moines Independent Community School District has been a hugely influential and frequently cited case regarding First Amendment rights for students. It created the Tinker test, or a way to see if student speech is actually disruptive at school. It weakened the legal idea that the school takes the place of the parent while the student is in attendance. You could even say the Tinker decision paved the way for the recent national school walkout that took place in schools across the country. In Los Gatos, California, a student got an F on a quiz after walking out during it as part of those protests. And now the teacher is getting a lot of hate for it. Was the teacher justified? Let me know in the comments. I sure know what Mary Beth Tinker would say. Today she goes on speaking tours to schools around the country teaching them about their rights and promoting youth activism. Here's a picture of her holding the actual detention slip she got for wearing an armband to school.
All right, so kind of some fun facts. Miss Mary Beth Tinker herself this girl right here, actually came and spoke to my my yearbook class, this past January. So that would have been January 2021. It was really amazing to have her. We had her over Zoom. The whole class listened in, and we talked to her about something that happened to us, some type of censorship that we received from the school district. And it was a really interesting discussion with her. She gave us some different insights. Some things we agreed with and some things we didn't, and that's what a discussion is meant to do. You're meant to disagree and try to find some kind of common ground. And I think we were able to do that, which was kind of cool. So, a little bit about her. Tinker versus Des Moines ISD, the Supreme Court case. In 1969, it established that students have First Amendment rights. So what you saw from the video is that these students wore these black armbands to school. The school didn't like that and said, nope, you're not allowed to do that, you're suspended. And the kids said, no, we have these First Amendment rights. And they fought for those First Amendment rights. They went all the way to the Supreme Court to defend those First Amendment rights. So, my question to you, and I want you to take like a couple minutes here to think about this, but how do you think that this decision, which was made back in 1969, it's been quite a few years since that time, how does this actually apply to your life as a student? Is there a way that it does? A couple ways that I can think that this would apply to students is you are allowed, and whether you know it or not, you are allowed to do and say certain things without being censored. Now, this is not the only Supreme Court case that actually involves student journalists or students who are wanting First Amendment right protection. There is this one, the Hazelwood versus Colemeyer case. Tinker versus Des Moines and Hazelwood versus Colemeyer are the two most cited cases for student journalists, student voices in the school. So we're going to take a look at this one. Now, keep in mind, that was 1969. The kids were fighting for Tinker versus Des Moines in the mid-1960s. This happened in the 1980s. So I would say probably about like 15 to 20 years later, this is when this happened. So let's take a look here.
Hazelwood v. Colemeyer, 1988. Does the decision of a principal to prohibit the publishing of certain articles in the school newspaper, which he deems inappropriate, violate the student journalist's First Amendment right of freedom of speech? In 1983, students in a Journalism 2 class at Hazelwood East High School were responsible for writing and editing their school's newspaper, The Spectrum. In May, the school's principal, Robert E. Reynolds, received the proofs for the May 13th issue and found 2 articles to be inappropriate for school. The controversial articles discussed the topics of teen pregnancy and the impact of divorce on students at school. In the article on teen pregnancy, students shared their experiences and opinions on the topic, but the girls' names were changed to protect their identities. The article on divorce discussed one student's experience with her parents' divorce, while depicting her father in a negative light. The principal forced the students to remove the articles. With the printing deadline quickly approaching, there was no time to edit the paper, causing entire pages, including unobjectionable articles, to be eliminated from the final edition. One student, Kathy Colemeyer, along with 2 others from the class, brought a suit to the U.S. District Court of the Eastern District of Missouri, claiming their First Amendment rights of free speech had been violated. In district court, the school argued that Reynolds was justified in his decision to remove the articles. The principal believed that simply changing the names of the girls in the pregnancy article did not ensure their anonymity, and in general, a feature discussing birth control and sexual activity was not appropriate for younger students. On the grounds of journalistic fairness, Reynolds stated that he thought the father in the divorce article had a right to be informed of the article's existence and given a chance to comment before it was printed. The district court ruled that Colemeyer's First Amendment right of free speech was not violated. Siding with the school, the court ruled that the school had the authority to remove articles written as part of the school curriculum. However, the issue did not die in district court. In 1986, the students took the case to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Eighth Circuit. The court decided that The Spectrum was considered a public forum and was intended to be and operated as a conduit for the student viewpoint. It ruled that the school could not censure the paper unless it was necessary to avoid material and substantial interference with school work or discipline or the rights of others. Still, the issue did not end there. Hazelwood High School officials, unhappy with the most recent ruling, appealed to the Supreme Court. Due to a conflict of law, meaning lower courts reached different conclusions about a federal issue, the Supreme Court justices decided to hear the case and issued a writ of certiorari. On October 13, 1987, the case of Hazelwood v. Colemeyer began proceedings in the Supreme Court of the United States. After reviewing the briefs submitted by each party, the decisions of the lower courts, and oral arguments, the Supreme Court was ready to rule. In a 5-3 decision, with one vacancy, the court held that the First Amendment did not require schools to affirmatively promote particular types of student speech. By refusing to sponsor speech that was inconsistent with the shared values of a civilized order, educators did not offend the First Amendment by exercising editorial control over the content of the paper. The court overturned the Eighth Circuit's decision that the paper was considered a public forum, saying that it was a limited forum for journalism students to write articles pursuant to the requirements of their journalism class, and therefore subject to appropriate editing by the school. The breakdown of the decision was as follows. Rehnquist, Stevens, O'Connor, Scalia, and White, who was chosen to write the opinion of the court, were in the majority. Brennan, Marshall, and Blackmun were in the minority, with Blackmun writing the dissenting opinion. Why was this case so significant? The decision in Hazelwood v. Colemeyer began a new trend in the rulings of First Amendment cases. During the 1960s, an era of student protest, publications exploring social issues such as civil rights were common and accepted. In 1969, the Supreme Court upheld that the freedom of expression of students is protected under the First Amendment in the case of Tinker v. Des Moines. At least 125 additional court cases around the country were decided in favor of the students during this time period due to the legal precedent set by the Tinker case. The decision in Hazelwood v. Colemeyer, as well as in Bethel School District v. Fraser in 1986, allowed school administrators to begin to reassert their authority in public schools. This shift in decisions reflected a shift in leadership and culture during the 1980s. The conservative Ronald Reagan was in office and appointed Justice Rehnquist to the Supreme Court, the Chief Justice from 1986 to 2005, also a conservative. Rehnquist succeeded Chief Justice Warren Burger, who, although he identified as a conservative, had made many liberal rulings on topics such as abortion and capital punishment, including the Tinker case. The court's decision in Hazelwood v. Colemeyer struck a devastating blow to scholastic journalism, significantly cutting back on the First Amendment protections of public high school students. This decision would set the censorship guidelines for many years to come, and to this day, continues to govern what can and cannot be printed in schools.
Oops. Okay. Let me go back to this. All right. So basically what we saw in Hazelwood versus Colemeyer took everything from Tinker versus Des Moines and flipped it. The Supreme Court had said in Tinker versus Des Moines, you are allowed to have a student, First Amendment student protection at the school grounds. And Hazelwood versus Colemeyer is basically saying, no, you are allowed to be censored. You are allowed to have certain things. You need basically some kind of protection while you're at the school, and especially if you're writing for the school. There's going to be a couple other Supreme Court cases you're going to be doing in your discussion today, and you get to choose, which ones you think are basically, you can kind of pick and choose, but there's some different ones that deal with First Amendment protection and First Amendment rights, and really every kind of case is slightly different from the other. This is slightly different from Tinker versus Des Moines, but it's just interesting to see that with the shift in our culture, as they kind of said in the video, there were more conservative justices that were appointed to the Supreme Court. They had a different ruling. People were also really fond of Reaganomics. You can kind of look that up. That was really popular then. And people wanted more conservative tones, so that meant more censorship in schools as well. So, kind of take a moment here and reflect on this question. How does the decision in Hazelwood versus Colemeyer affect you as a student journalist? Does it apply to things like e-zine or yearbook? And before I go into a couple of these things right here, I do want to say that we've actually had censorship. It's not uncommon for us to be censored. For example, we had stickers that we sold back in October of 2019. It's not super long ago. It's just two school years ago. So back in October of 2019, I was going to take my students to Washington, D.C. for a big journalism yearbook convention. This school year, this upcoming school year, I'm actually going to take my students to Los Angeles for that same kind of convention. So what we did back in October of 2019 is we sold these stickers. The students in my yearbook class had designed the stickers, and they were all of little kind of jokes and characters of teachers at LASA. We got the teachers' permission to sell and distribute these stickers, and then we did, and we sold them, and all the money would come back to the yearbook program so that we could help students kind of get to Washington, D.C., especially the ones who needed some more financial help. And unfortunately, though, one of those stickers really bugged some of the parents at LASA. It was a picture of a teacher riding a horse with an American flag. And some of the parents really thought that that had some bad meaning to it. The students did not feel that way at all. In fact, when the sticker was being made, no one had said anything, and the students thought that was probably the best one. Students were also really excited to get that sticker. No teacher, no admin had any opposition to it. But parents who are not in the school every single day, they took that sticker and thought, this is not okay, and we're going to do something about it. So instead of coming to me, so the parents bypassed me, they bypassed the principal, and they went straight to the superintendent. And in doing so, they basically said, we're not interested in having a conversation with you about why this is wrong or why we're upset, but rather they used their privilege to go straight to the superintendent because they knew they were going to be heard. And so I've actually been listening to a podcast lately called Nice White Parents. I highly encourage you to listen to it. And it gives you a really good sense of what parents who are white, their kind of effect that they can have on school districts across the U.S. And this has been going on for decades. It's really interesting listen. There's a lot of research behind this, actually. And so what happened with us is that parents went to the school board and said, nope, we don't like this. You need to tell them to stop. So ultimately, the superintendent basically went through my principal and said, she can't sell that anymore. So no sales. We bought all those stickers and we were unable to sell them, which was really unfortunate. And it really was disappointing in our community that really wanted those stickers. So I say all that because that is censorship right there. That is being told that you are not allowed to do something. Your free speech ends right here because that is not okay. Because some parents complained about it, right? So for me, I find that to be really interesting, the effect that parents, especially parents of a certain privilege, can have such a big impact on our schools and what we are doing in our schools to try to actually help our students. We were trying to get them financial support so that they could go to Washington. Now, am I a little bitter about that still? Absolutely. Censorship can really, affect people in profound ways. Other ways that we have been censored before, there was a yearbook before I was teaching here, the year before I came on as the yearbook advisor, that there was a photo there was text in the yearbook that had called a group a certain name. The group wanted to be called by that name, though. They were Jewish students at Lhasa, and they thought the name of their little group that they had made, their organization, was really funny, and they wanted to be called that. So it's not like we in the yearbook called them that without their permission. They said they wanted to be called that, and we put that in the yearbook. Again, I was not the advisor at this point. And anyways, the principal was not happy about it. Miss Krasinski, she was not happy about it. And so she said, we can't have that in the yearbook. You can't, distribute the yearbook with that in there. So instead, what I was told is that there were stickers printed. So that's what you can do. You can have little stickers that basically are the same photo, same headline, same caption, but maybe slight things are changed. And all those stickers had to be placed very perfectly into each and every yearbook. Well, when you sell about 800 yearbooks, that can take a really long time. So every single yearbook had to have that sticker put in it, basically changing the name of the group because she didn't like it. So again, that's another idea of censorship right there. There are things, though, especially last year, this is my last example for you guys, there was a spread that was made in the yearbook, and it was about birth control. Now, you guys are taking health classes, you're learning more about things, and there was a student who at Lhasa was really fighting for LGBTQ representation for health classes, and it was a really interesting story. We ran the story in the yearbook. It is in there. It has a photo of her and what she was doing to help kind of fight for those rights, which is really interesting. But we wanted to do kind of like you guys are making an ASF. We wanted to make little graphics to help represent help showcase different type of birth control methods and different types of contraceptives and what they are and how effective they are. Now, when I saw the spread design, because I didn't design it, the kids did. When I saw the spread design, it didn't really make sense to me. We have this story that was talking about LGBTQ representation as far as sexual health classes. But the contraceptive graphics didn't really make sense with the story at all. So I actually ran it by the principal and I said, hey, this is something the kids want to do. It doesn't make sense to me. I just wanted to get your opinion on it. And she said that we should not print that, and instead that we should find something else for the story. She says she really liked the story, but there's no reason to have all those graphics of contraceptives. It doesn't make sense in a yearbook, and it didn't make sense with the story. So that's a little bit of censorship that I have actually used on my students. I said, no, I don't want this in the yearbook. I've ran it by Stacia. She doesn't want it in the yearbook. Let's use something else. And so we did, and we redesigned the spread so that we can actually talk more about LGBTQ, and that was a really interesting spread in the yearbook. It was actually one of the last ones to be published because it took a really long time, and we had to go over it quite a few times. So I can show you that spread probably next week in class if you're interested. So anyways, those are 3 examples of how censorship has happened in our little community here at Lhasa, and specifically just with the yearbook. So what this all kind of means is that we are allowed to say virtually anything, but speech really does affect society in profound ways. We, as journalists, you as a student journalist, need to find a balance between what you're allowed to say versus what you think is right to say. Just because you have the right to say something doesn't mean you should say it. Honestly, I live out in the country in Elgin, and I've even heard that argument many times from my neighbors. Well, we're allowed to do this because we have the right to do this. I'm like, cool, but that doesn't make it any better that you are doing it, right? So it's a whole balance of ethics. Ethical decisions must be made to protect your published material, but also protect those who your material is talking about. So I say all this because I really want to get you guys in the idea that you aren't just allowed to say and do anything. I mean, you are, but at the same time, is that the right thing to do, right? We need to sometimes think a couple of things, before we actually go ahead and say or do or publish anything. I also want to give you this little tidbit here, that private schools are very different. Private schools are allowed to have a lot more censorship because they are private. Private school officials are not state actors, and their actions to prevent students from speaking or publishing do not violate the First Amendment in any way. Now, here's my little story on this. This kid right here, his name is Alexander Patterson, and he wrote this book called Choices. When I was a student at Baylor University, my junior year, I was writing for the Baylor School of Education. So basically, my role as media assistant is that I would write stories about students, about teachers, about alumni, about whatever I wanted, really, so that it would benefit or make the School of Education look more attractive. That is what PR does, public relations. They're all working to try to make things look better and put them in the best light. And so, anyways, I found this student and I thought, wow, this is really interesting. He wrote this book. He is a student within the School of Education at Baylor, so he was trying to become a teacher. And I was like, you know what? I would love to write a story about him. So I interviewed him and I asked him, what was your inspiration for writing the book in the first place? And he told me, well, when I came out as gay, I felt a lot more willing and ready to write things than I ever had before in my life. So basically saying that his inspiration for the book really came from coming out. And I thought that was fantastic. And I wrote about that. And I wrote this really great story. I sent it to my editor, who is she was the head of communications at the School of Education at Baylor. And she read it and she was like, I love the story. I think it's great. But if we were not at, if we're not at Baylor, I would run it. But since we are, I can't. And I said, why not? And turns out there's a lot of things at Baylor that are very much not okay. And one of those things is being gay. It still is. And so at Baylor, if you are caught engaging in, engaging with other students of the same gender in a sense that is like sexual or things like that. I mean, or even if they just kind of learned that you're gay and maybe you got scholarships from the Baptist institution, which, they very much state that they are against LGBTQ. And so, I was not able to write about him being gay, basically because Baylor doesn't support that. And I was so upset about it. It just made me so mad. And I was mad for a couple of days. I was just like pissed off about this. And I kept going back to my editor and being like, this is stupid. And she's like, yeah, it is. And she's like, unfortunately, this is where you chose to go to school. Unfortunately, this is where we work. And so there are certain things we can and cannot say. And basically, she said, I can't mention at all that he's gay. And so I went back to him and I told him, hey, I can't write this in this story, and I think it's dumb, and I think it's stupid, and I'm so, so sorry about this. And he was upset too, and he had a right to be. But eventually I asked him, I would still like to go forward with the story, but I just can't mention anything about that. And he, I gave him some time. I gave him a couple of days to think about it before I had to run the story, and he eventually said, yep, that sounds good. You can run it. So all that being said, private schools are not state actors. They are allowed to censor you, and they will not violate anything for the First Amendment because of that. Just kind of keep that in mind. Private school is very different than public school. The cases in the Supreme Court case, the Hazelwood versus Colemeyer, the Tinker versus Des Moines here. I mean, these cases are public school students. So they are allowed, to go and defend their First Amendment rights. But at private schools, it's very different, which is very interesting. All right. So with this here, I'm going to go past this because this is something that we do in person. But I will read it out to you because I want you to potentially think about, who and what you would want to talk about with this. So, pretending that you are a student at this school, that I'm going to talk about right here, and that you are a journalist for, let's say, the yearbook, okay, or maybe the newspaper. It says yearbook, yeah. So you're going to be on the yearbook. All right, here's the prompt. Adnan, a popular senior student, dies in a car accident after drinking with his team on the football field. So this is one of your peers. He is a senior. You guys are freshmen right now. He's very popular, and he was drinking with his team, and he was on the football field. So he was on school property, and he was drinking, and then he later died in a car accident. A week later, the yearbook staff decide that they want to do a spread on Adnan's death. Inside the article, they decide they want to write about his school involvement, so his leadership, but also they want to write about details on his death. So take a look at that one, details on his death. They also plan on including a paragraph on teen drinking and the devastation that it can cause. As a student journalist, I want you right now to think about a couple things. One, who would be the people that you would talk to about this? Is there anyone that you would not talk to? Think about ethically. Is there anyone you don't want to talk to about this? Also, with this, is there any topic that you might not want to talk about with this? If you look about this, they said that the yearbook wants to do, they want to talk about his school involvement, his leadership, but also details about his death. Those three different things. Is there any one of those that you potentially maybe don't want to talk about, and why? Or do you want to get permission from someone to talk about any of those things, and why? Think about your specific ethics here. I want you to really question yourself. Why would I want to do something? Why would I not want to do something? Is this the right choice? Is my choice to write about details about his death going to affect his family or his friends or the school community in any specific way? So these are things that we try to think about as a journalist before we publish, before things come out. I believe this is my last slide with all of this, but I want you to really kind of remember this. Ethics is a system of moral values, principles, of right and good conduct. So we really need to, there's no right and wrong necessarily when it comes to ethics. It's up to you to make a choice that you think is good, will benefit the public in a good way, that is going to protect your sources, but also tell the truth. It is a balance. It is so hard as a journalist to find a balance, okay? Now, there are, of course, resources that help us with all these things. We have a staff manual for yearbook. I come out with it every year, and I tell the students, here's what's okay, here's what's not okay. And we use that the entire year. There's also scholastic press law. This is used by professionals. There are certain standards, certain pillars that we actually follow as journalists. You can look up scholastic press law, and you'll see the different pillars that we follow as a journalist. If you go to school to become a journalist, if you actually major in journalism, which I did, you have to take scholastic press law classes so that you can actually learn the pillars and standards and how to apply them when you are writing. AP Style Book is also really great too. It's going to protect you from writing things that maybe you shouldn't write, AP Style has certain things that you should and shouldn't say. How do we want to address this group of people here? It can help you with that. All right, that is the end of our lesson for today. I hope you took something away from it. And from here, you're going to be working on your discussion next, okay?